Welcome to the first of our Insights interview series, focusing on COVID-19. And what we're going to do over the next few weeks or few months is actually chat to different people in the sector about what they're doing and how perhaps the organisations they've worked with have needed to pivot, the buzzword of the moment, with their services to still keep engaged with their membership or stakeholders. And we're thrilled to have Andrew Moore, Project Manager from Clubs Tasmania, with us today, all the way from sunny Hobart. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Georgie and viewers. How are you all?
Now, Andrew, tell us, you've got a long history working in the community sector, whether it's in schools or football clubs or, RSL clubs. Do you want to tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So 52. So I've had a number of roles, industry and volunteering experience. So I guess went to university, studied as a teacher. So as part of that, coach swimming, football, soccer, got involved at that level. And then as I worked my way through my teaching career, there was a number of roles within schools where I, as I said, coached or managed teams. I did 10 years with School Sport Australia as a manager, so filled roles for Western Australia as well as for School Sport Australia on a couple of overseas tours. I've done managed some volunteers at the Commonwealth and Olympic Games, which has been an amazing experience for Melbourne and Gold Coast and Sydney. And I guess in the last 10 years, I have had a couple of roles on not-for-profit boards, and also taken on presidency of both a Master Rules footy club and a junior football club. So there's sort of just a quick snapshot.
Quick snapshot, but it shows the depth of experience you've got in this field. And your current role is project manager at Clubs Tasmania, working with all sorts of community clubs, from RSLs to sporting clubs and the like, with Clubs Tasmania's mission, I'm going to sort of paraphrase, but really wanting to create sustainable or help strengthen clubs so they can be sustainable and, I guess, thriving instead of just surviving. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the work you do there?
Yeah, sure. So you've done your research there, George, which is great. So yeah, look, our primary core purpose is to strengthen the community club industry. And I guess as part of that, we work with others, whether that's community sport and rec, state growth, local government, to help communities grow. And as part of that process, I guess I commenced in the role. I did a little bit of research and wrote a white paper in 2018. The government liked that paper, and so they funded my role from until 2022, which is great. So I said full-time in the space. And I guess my role in the last 12 months has been involved a lot of listening, really. And as part of that, Tasmania's quite... I'm trying to think of the right word, but it has 29 local government councils for a population of 525,000. So one of the first commitments I made was to get to each of those regions and listen. And I guess I went and ran a community clubs forum in each of those local government areas. And we were trial and error, but we really asked 4 or 5 questions about what the barriers to participation were, what their biggest challenge were, who were they currently working with, what organisations, and who else could help them in what they were striving to do. So I guess we asked those 4 or 5 questions. So that was sort of the initial phase.
Yeah.
And you go.
Time lapse from Melbourne to Hobart. And I guess, I know at Fetch and Events, and we've been lucky enough to work with yourself and Clubs Tasmania and meet some of these clubs and do some training with them. And for us, a focus really is around engagement, and whether that's engaging with their members or their staff or, tourists that happen to go past on their motorbike and stop in at the RSL for a lunch. What makes I guess what have you seen successful community clubs do with their engagement that has meant their clubs been successful?
I think the clubs that are successful at it are actually sort of reaching out and pulling in people who can help. And I guess the successful, effective organisations or community clubs are doing that is they're making an informed choice to partner with somebody. So whether or not that's an agency that has a need for more volunteers, so they then partner with Volunteering Tasmania, or that their canteen sales have been down, that they've done a survey of their members who have all said the food's shite, and so they've changed providers, so they've then partnered with Bid Food or PFD Foods, or they've changed something, but it's an informed choice. You compare that to sort of the clubs that I may not think are, you know, based on some evidence, are robust, viable, or are not doing too well. The choices that they're making are not informed choices. So I think
you touched on a really important thing there around, you know, partnering with other people. And I know I've worked with sporting clubs, you know, regional ones that are pretty scarce with their resources, but they actually partner with other clubs. So I know of pony clubs that have partnered with the local footy club to share things like working bee resources. So perhaps, and I know of one that the football club didn't have the resources to man the barbecue at Bunnings on a Saturday, yet the equestrian club did. So the equestrian club ran the barbecue with the proceeds going to both clubs. And then when it was working bee time, the footy club brought all their sort of hands-on help over to help with the pony club. So not seeing another community club as competition, but actually seeing how you can work together.
Yeah, and I guess, like Georgie, I mean, I really would support what you're saying there. And I guess 14 months into my little project, and I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. But look, in some ways, I'm in the mind shift business, working with my members. But the first step is, find out where they're at, and then find out what's needed.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, I could be a complete lunatic, but at the end of the day, we try and use some of our informed decisions and learned understandings from the stuff that we've done in our life to offer or to be invited in. And I guess we sort of, you know, whilst we're doing that mind shift business, we've got to try to coach clubs, because if we come in and beat our chests and ride into town with our nice badge and uniform, that's not going to work. So
and it is a mind shift thing, particularly because clubs have been operating potentially a certain way for the last 50 years, 40 years, 10 years, and they know they've come to a block and it's not working. But to actually shift, I guess, the mindset can be challenging for people in the club who've been there for a long time, because as you say, we don't want to sort of ride into town with our, you know, our hats on and our badge to say this is the way to do it, and not insult everything that they've done in the past and say that was the wrong thing, because at the time that was probably the right thing. But unfortunately, or fortunately or unfortunately, membership models change, people's behaviours change, what people expect from a club changes, and it's how we can work with clubs to guide their engagement so that they are hitting those objectives that they're trying to achieve, and create that sustainable club.
Yeah, and look, one of the findings that I've had in the while I've been negotiating and meeting and talking and communicating with clubs is that the average age of demographic is in a transition. So in Tasmania, the traditional age of a volunteer is about 64. And so their mindset, their learned experiences from the last 20 years, and those sets of experiences are not going to inform what the club of the next 20 years is going to need. So that's that sort of space in the middle. And I've called it the pain points. And so as part of that process with those community club forums is, to identify what are the pain points, which helps then myself or any other community organisation that wants to go on a plan, make up a strategic plan and actually determine where they're going and how they're going to get there, what resources, what people are needed. So, and that does take time. So.
And just touching on that point, I accessed some research about a year or so ago, maybe a bit longer, with regards to membership models declining across the world. And it talked about people born I think it was like 1967, were sort of the industrial model. And so they'd been brought up with loyalty, sort of aligning with things, that is how they had been brought up. Whereas anyone born past that had been brought up in quite an individual mindset, quite independent, challenged things. And so we were trying to fit this post-industrial era model to an industrial era model of membership that doesn't always work, and looking at new generations coming through. I know with volunteering, you know, we may not get people for the 20 years that you used to get them for, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. You might get a volunteer come for a year, but it's changing your mindset and your mind shift so you can get the best engagement with that person and the best results.
Yeah. And you've a little alarm bell's gone off on my head there, George. But one of the things that I've been doing is I'm going around the clubs, and I think I've visited a little over 200 in 12 months. I try, and if there's an honour board there, I'll take a photo with my phone. And the messages that I've got from that is that I have a look, and then if I go back to sort of 1993, G. Statius, President, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 2005, 2006. And that's that old paradigm, but we need to shift that now. You know, like the world has changed massively in regards to time, how we have relationships, how, you know, look at currently in COVID. I know it's one of your questions for later on, but look, you know, our young people are learning from home at the moment. You know, through digital contact.
And, you know, sort of going back to an earlier point, you talked about the survey. I've been involved with community clubs where they have done a survey of their members. And there were so many assumptions that the peak body had made that actually the information that came back on the survey completely contradicted what they'd said. So, you know, for me, the first part of engagement is actually understanding your audience, not making assumptions around what they'll want or what they don't want, or how often they want to be contacted, or, you know, how little they want to be contacted. But that first step of actually making a contact with them, and by doing a survey, you're not only getting really, you know, invaluable information, but that's your first piece of engagement, is that your stakeholders feel engaged and feel that they're, you know, they have a voice and that you're listening to them, and that can only strengthen your relationship with them.
Yeah, and I know one of your questions was, you know, like what framework do we follow when we're trying to do some community engagement? And I mean, I know that I try to use a similar model that you've talked about there. I mean, I take my stuff from the Harvard Community Conversations as a bit of a framework, and really listen, respond, act, and then follow up. And that needs to be done in a timely manner, because I can't go along and meet the CWA from Rutherglen, and then 4 weeks later I get this email that I send off to the CWA at Rutherglen. That's not forming a relationship that's mutual, or that shows that you're investing in their space. You know, it has to be done pretty promptly, I reckon. That shows that you're there, and then what the next step is. So.
Exactly. And I recall one of the community sessions I sat in with you in Tassie. We sort of heard so much about how the demographic in a certain town had changed, and there were a lot of people that travelled to work at the mines or different industries. It meant they didn't keep the hours of 9 till 5 that perhaps people had in the past, which meant they could, you know, come to footy training on a Thursday night or volunteer in the canteen on a Saturday. So you're now dealing with members with different careers, different shift times, and that completely changes the personality of your membership base and the town, and then how clubs can try and adapt to that.
Oh, and look, that's one thing that we've sort of put out a message while all our clubs are being impacted by COVID, George, is to understand who your members are. Because quite often, a lot of the time, these clubs are trying to service their members with the product, whether they're a footy club or whether they're a CWA or whether they're a rowing club. And so it's all about creating the activity and the participation. And you don't often get a chance. That COVID's really providing all of us with a chance just to sit back and analyse or review or summarise wherever you're at. So one of our messages has been, as I said, take the time to just look at your membership base and try and understand a little bit more about what your product is and what they need. And I'm wondering if we drop back into that space where you and I were 12 months ago in that community, and what they wanted were basketball and football stadiums, when the actual needs of the community were far different. They needed bike trails and a roof over some form of, you know, activity, because it rains 310 days out of 365. So there was no alignment between the needs and the wants, and then the resources. And
that's so important about, you know, I guess an upside, if you can have an upside of the downtime, is that we do have time to just stop and review. And I know a lot of clubs and community groups and volunteering programs and events are doing that, because we actually have this weird time luxury to actually look over things and go, where does this fit? Are we, everything we do, does it meet our purpose and our objective? Does it even meet our constitution? Because I've certainly worked with community clubs who've done great things, but then when they looked at their constitution, they realised none of it lined up. So I kind of feel at the moment we're talking in a pre-COVID, during COVID, and then I don't want to say post-COVID, because that sort of makes it seem like we're going to come out of this in a clean-cut way, but what the world will look like as we do start to return to some kind of non-isolating period. So I guess pre-COVID, what are some, great things you saw clubs doing? If you've got a couple of examples of clubs that were really shining because of certain engagement things they were doing with their members or their, athletes or their coaches.
All right. So look, one particular junior football club, I might highlight that, is that they had a couple of sponsors, and in the past the sponsor had sponsored them each year, and I'll use my props because that's what we're doing. And so the president or the club would go down to the sponsor and he'd get his wallet out, and, out would come the money. And this particular club decided to take a different approach. What they did was they reviewed their registrations process, and the decision they made for a new board was the registrations or subs or whatever we call them must cover the cost for running the club. Any money that they make out of the canteen, the bar, game day, raffles, whatever, could then be invested back into the club. So they made that clear decision. And then they took that decision, they went to the sponsor and said, and it was a bakery, the sponsor, and they said, he handed over the $2,000 cash. And the president said, I'm actually going to give you the money back. And, the owner of the franchise said, oh, really? He said, yeah, but I want it in other ways. What he wanted to do was to reward and recognise his volunteers with some vouchers. And so he asked the franchisee of the bakery business, could he make up some little cars and put $10 on them? So instead of the $1,000 sponsorship cash, which really I'm not quite sure what happened previously. It just seems to, with a junior football club, it wasn't paying wages. It was probably just going somewhere. Who knows?
Yeah.
And so that $1,000 turned into 100 vouchers. That six times a week, the committee could go around and say, hey, Georgie, thanks for turning the barbecue snags tonight. You helped us raise $200. Or to Barry, who filled the water bottles up every weekend, you go and give him and say, go and get yourself a coffee and a scroll. So that was a really powerful way in which to turn $1,000. In actual fact, it was goodwill. It was using a framework to retain and recruit the volunteers. So that's a really powerful story. I like that one.
Yeah, it is, and it's not only the the rewarding the volunteers and sort of that reward and recognition, but it actually is an added benefit for the sponsor. And I know of sponsors that just get the letter each year saying, oh, can you donate $500 or $2,000 or $5,000 to the footy club again, with no conversation between the club and the sponsor of how the sponsor might want to be involved. But it's just expected, well, they've donated to us for years, so they'll do it again. And I think more and more people are realising we can't just do that sort of set and forget model, but actually have a conversation with the sponsor, because the club might have some goal that they can give the sponsor. And I often say this with sporting clubs, you might have a high profile athlete or, someone that's really revered, whether it's a coach. Why don't you offer that coach for a team session to the sponsor? So the coach goes along, does a bit of a, keynote speech to the staff. The sponsor gets this great engagement. The club hasn't had to pay for it because they've got that resource there, but it's adding more benefit to the partnership and making it a mutually beneficial partnership rather than just putting a logo up on the fence as people drive into the club grounds.
Yeah, and I think if we were talking about fundraising or relationships 101, that's a point that I reckon a lot of clubs miss. And it's probably driven, if you look at the millennial generation and our generation, Georgie, if we were born in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, that, yeah, we want more from all of our relationships, whether that's our time that we volunteer. We don't want to volunteer for 20 years. We want to volunteer for 2 hours, and we want to see there's some return for the time. Yeah. And ideally, sponsors now, if they're investing 1,000 or 2,000, what are they getting in return? And so, yeah, it's about helping and coaching clubs and boards to understand, well, what's the value that you've got? And quite often it's the database, you know, that you're able to link in for that business to be able to flood emails. And I know, but that's the world we live in, with some special offers. Like for that particular bakery story, I know that they will be flooding the emails of the club members with Easter buns and things like that, because it's their product that'll help their bottom line. I'll be quite happy with that. But yeah, sometimes that question's not asked. It's just assumed.
And, you know, it can be as simple as a lot of corporates, you know, they don't have to be a massive corporate, even small to medium-sized businesses will have some kind of corporate social responsibility program. They might not name it that, but they might offer their staff for 1 day a year to go and do some volunteering. So that, you know, it highlights their altruistic side as an employer of choice. Well, why doesn't that day get offered to the community club to go and do a working bee in the grounds or paint the new club rooms or something like that? So it's actually meaningful volunteering that forms part of the sponsorship. And once again, it's an added value for both sides.
Yeah, and look, another story I might share with you as well, where we're talking about good news stories. There was another club that one of their members had cancer, and it was a story that I know because I actually taught this woman way back in the day when I was a teacher, and she was in my high school, which was back in the 90s. And yeah, so unfortunately she had cancer, and I just ran into her and had a conversation with her, and I asked her what was happening, and she told me this story that she's got a fundraiser, and what she was doing was putting together a story that could support the family who were going through cancer. So she was organising holidays for the family, but it was all, as I said, as gifts really.
Yep.
And she sort of said, I've hit a brick wall. I just don't know what to do. And I thought to myself, I said, look, I'll go and have a coffee with you one day. But anyway, what we did was we basically mapped, like had a road map, and just put the idea in the front was the holiday. And I thought, okay, who do you know? Okay, who are your contacts? And what we were able to do from that was her school, her kids played junior football club. And I said, well, look, that's where I think you should start. And that framework is something that I use now with a lot of clubs that I work with, whether they're volunteers or they've actually got a CEO or whatever, is map who your contacts are, just using that simple little tool. And from that, you'll realise who your partners are, who you could work with, and what opportunities might be there that you haven't explored. And it could be volunteers. It could be, like you talked about before, a volunteer coming for a day in a workforce, or utilising their products. So.
Yeah. And the key thing there is you took the time to just sit and have a coffee. You know, many times I hear community organisations say, well, you know, we're a great club, we should be sponsored, and or this corporate or this real estate agent, you know, will want to get their name out and about. It's like there are hundreds of thousands of community clubs and not-for-profits in Australia. So, you know, there's got to be more than just, well, we're a good one to give money to, but actually having that conversation and understanding. And sort of moving into COVID, I'm seeing a lot that people are just sort of saying, oh, well, we won't contact our sponsors. And yes, maybe the sponsors aren't in a position to be involved, but actually have the conversation with them, because we know that people want to be engaged more than ever. They're going to be spending more time on their digital devices, watching TV, those kind of things. And we know that brands that succeed coming out of something like this cocooning period are the ones that have actually engaged all the way through. So clubs, this is the time for clubs to have that conversation with their sponsors of how do you want to be involved? You know, do you want to, I don't know, sponsor a little handball, a virtual handball training video that the club's going to send out? So what I'm saying to clients for community clubs or events is don't just assume people are going to batten down the hatches and not spend money, because you might be surprised. And smart sponsors will actually be ramping up their activity and their engagement during this time.
Yeah, look, and again, great conversation, George. And look, alarm bells going off here. So we know that during a depression or a recession, the three things that increase rather than decrease, gambling spend goes up, entertainment goes up and marketing goes up. So businesses will be looking to stay involved. And if clubs haven't got their radar up around that, they're going to miss the boat. Absolutely. Agree with you. Yep.
And I heard a great quote this morning that was something like, people, if you're not in the market, people will still donate. They just won't donate to you. And it did research through the GFC and previous recessions about organisations that came out, and it was particularly around not-for-profits that came out flourishing, were the ones that had a balance of making cuts where they needed to, but also investing where they needed to, and investing in market and research and development. And they actually came out on top, you know, as they came out of the recession. Of course, we know this is, I hate to use the word because it's so overused, but an unprecedented situation that we're in. But if we do look at previous kind of cocooning periods, you're right, it's how people and clubs invest in that. So on COVID, what, and I guess I'll talk about the hospitality industry, which I know Clubs Tasmania obviously is part of the Tasmanian Hospitality Association. I've just been amazed at how fast cafes and restaurants and bars have had to change their business model pretty much overnight because of the shutdowns, and the way they've either, you know, become a takeaway, bars become a takeaway bottle shop. I've seen gourmet pubs become gourmet grocers, all sorts of things, because they haven't had time to sit and think about it. They've had to act overnight. Now, community clubs, you know, no one's playing community football or tennis or, you know, golf in some states. What have you seen within the community clubs and maybe even RSLs of what they're doing during this time?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I reckon I've seen the continuum. So I've gone from nothing.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, head down. Oh my God, COVID's ruined us. We're not doing anything. So we've seen that.
Yeah.
Look, I reckon a lot of clubs are still in transition. So, and look, I'm not quite sure what it's like in Victoria, but like, you know, so COVID's arrived. It's impacting everywhere. Most competitions have been suspended. The only real clubs that are still going are golf clubs in Tasmania.
Yep.
With obviously some strict social distancing, and their clubhouses have to be shut. The only thing that they can offer is the pro shop can be open to trade,
right.
and they can sell food and drinks, but no alcohol. So
yeah.
We've had, I guess, a lot of those golf clubs have sought advice around how they operate and what the rules were. And so originally the questions were, oh my God, how are we going to do it? So can we do this? And even then, can we now operate and sell meals from our kitchen as long as nobody's in there?
Yeah.
Well, again, the advice has been provided that they're adhering to the social distancing rules. They've got to have a zone for pickup, and people can't enter the clubhouse. There's no money changing hands, all of that. So we've seen a number of golf clubs do that.
Yeah.
In terms of like, sort of, we've seen a lot of the restaurants, bars, and cafes through the hospitality industry in Tassie, because our environment's a little bit different down here in Tassie, and so that supermarkets don't sell alcohol in Tassie.
Yeah.
Purely the domain of bottle shops, which are generally attached to hotels.
Yep.
Or standalone. So with those standalones, there's been no impact to their business. They've continued to trade, and of course, during a recession, that goes up. But what we've seen a lot of the hotels do is offer food. So they've got a resource in the kitchen, so they're offering food through their bottle shop. So those mindsets, people who are open to see an opportunity, be flexible in their thinking, yeah, they're certainly operating and offering something, because that's how they need to do it. Whether that's like frozen meals, cooked meals, yeah. So we're definitely seeing that. But really, across the community club industry, I don't know whether we've actually seen the green shoots come up yet. You know, I reckon there's a lot of reacting to COVID as opposed to now bouncing off the other side.
Yeah, and we know that we'll go through stages during the pandemic. You know, from sort of shock, anger, grief, bargaining, acceptance, and each organisation will need to sort of react through those, and particularly the way they engage with their members, because their members will be going through different phases, so how they sort of interact and do that messaging. And I've been really impressed with how the arts industry has sort of, I guess, adapted during this, because obviously they've pretty much been shut down like many other industries, but the way they've moved their, I guess, their value onto social media. So whether it's local, or not even local, but theatre groups, and I think the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra has been doing some live streaming, the way zoos have done live streaming. So of course, if you're sitting at home and looking at Melbourne Zoo and watching their live stream, the first thing you'll want to do when we get out of this is go to Melbourne Zoo and see everything close up and, you know, in real life. And the same with plays. You know, if you start watching Melbourne Theatre Company plays streamed, of course that's going to be in your mind. So you're going to want to do something with them, you know, when we're out of this. Flight Centre, I got an email from them, and they're doing the whole armchair travel sort of series, which I think is fantastic, because of course they want us to get excited about traveling at the end of this, so we book their holiday with them. So there's some really amazing things that people are doing, understanding that if we take you on the journey, you'll want to come and visit us and be part of us at the end of it.
And I look, again, that's fascinating to hear that, because if I try and think to myself, yeah, I reckon before we were using IT for entertainment or for amusement, whereas now businesses, community clubs, volunteers are using that. It's the only avenue they've got to share their product, to interact, because we've got this massive void of connectivity. Whereas, you know, we used to either go down to the club, go to the pub, go to the tab, whatever you did, you go and volunteer at the CWA, or you go to the market on a Saturday morning. All of those avenues, that void hasn't been replaced. And we're just starting to see how IT, which was good. And look, I'll share a quick story. My brother-in-law on the weekend, he said, let's do a progressive dinner. So 3 families in my extended family, everybody made a dish.
Yes.
We agreed on a central place.
Yes.
We drove in, we exchanged the food with social distancing. Then we went back to the homes, opened up the Zoom and the FaceTime, and everybody ate and had a bit of a conversation. So again, that came out of COVID. We would never have done that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think of footy clubs or, you know, sports clubs with trivia nights. There's no reason they can't hold a trivia night on Zoom, and still get everyone engaged. I know my local CWA, we had our first Zoom meeting last week, which I sort of ummed and ahed, did I want to go? I'd had a day full of Zoom work meetings, but it was terrific, because it was actually, we probably got to chat to people more than we do in the meeting, because it was just everyone saying what they're up to. We checked in on members who were nurses, and we're going to look at doing things like trivia nights. We're going to have a limoncello making demonstration online. So
they're brilliant ideas.
And one thing that, you know, keeps coming up when I sort of attend different webinars and things is really giving a choice of content too. So not just saying, well, we'll keep in touch with people and our members over this time by sending them an email. They might not want to always read an email. So you might do a little Q&A with a coach on your Instagram feed where people can ask, you know, random questions. Or we said you might do a handball lesson on Instagram, and there's a lot of sporting clubs and codes doing really fun things on TikTok, and you know, simple things that people can get involved in that don't cost money, because people don't have a lot of money, but they might have the time. And if you're a club member stuck at home for 3 months, or, you know, however long it is, and your club keeps you entertained and keeps you engaged, you're going to have that loyalty there at the end. And I keep saying to people, it's like, you know, have you ever had that friend that just sort of drops off the radar during the hard times and you don't hear from them? And then a year later, they expect to walk back into your life and pick up where they left off. You know, it won't work. So don't be that club or brand or event.
Yeah, and you know what, if you're not doing those things and open to being creative or talking or network, that's what's going to happen. Some of those clubs next year are going to open up their registrations and then call, and they're going to be down 20, 30, 40%. In fact, it's not just clubs, businesses will all be the same. So unless you reinvent yourself and have a look at your processes. And I had one of the strong messages. I met up with there's a sort of Clubs Tas, Clubs New South Wales, Clubs Big. We had a Zoom session last Friday, and one of the strong messages that come out was, that if the whole of the community and society is going to come out the other side leaner. And you know what? That'll be leaner sponsorship. There won't be as much money. There won't be as many. There won't be as many volunteers. There won't be as many members. That things will be condensed. I strongly believe that's one thing that we're going to have to get our head around.
Yeah.
And I sent an email out. I can't remember, last week or something. It was a video message, I think, to my members, and I said, send me your ideas, and I'll try and collate a database. And I read 3 of them this morning. I might share with you because you just gave out a list, which was good.
Yeah.
One was back in 20, 30 years ago, there used to be a photo of a football game, and it would be on the back page of the football or the second back page, and it was spot the ball. And you used to have to mark an X on like the grid.
Yep.
Somebody said, just take the photo and put it up there and get everybody to snapshot. And I thought, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Second was that online quiz idea of yours, and using Kahoot, which is obviously, as a former teacher, that's a great tool. It's so easy, and you can have an online quiz using Zoom. So there we go. There's a second idea. And the third idea I liked was a ridiculous kick challenge. So you've seen all the basketball, the frisbees into the whatever. Well, this was just come up with your own at school holidays here in Tassie. So, so my goal by the end of the week is to say 10 ideas to get you through the school holidays or COVID and throw them out there. So
yeah. And I love that because you actually went out to them asking for ideas. And there's some fantastic stuff. I don't know if you've seen, I think it's the Getty Museum in LA has said to people, try and recreate famous artworks with just household items. And it is just hilarious, and it's worth going online and having a look. And what a great thing. I mean, now I've never even paid any attention to the Getty Museum in LA, but I certainly do now. So what a simple thing. They're not actually having to do much because they've put the challenge out to the community, but the community gets to really get involved. And I mean, how much fun, you or your partner or your family putting together a famous artwork. You get it tweeted. Well, of course, you're going to love the fact that everyone's looking at your photo online. So, really simple things that don't have to be these sort of big budget online virtual conferences or setups, but things that will really engage people, I think can be fantastic.
And that key word you're using again is engaging. They're not rocket science, but we do need to share. We need to have those networks and platforms so that people can give us ideas, or we then go back the other way if our little club or pony club or whatever is having a great idea. So, so that can be a strength, I think.
Yeah, and sorry, I cut you off then. It can be as simple as, and certainly an organisation, a membership organisation I'm working with, at just making a note to ring a couple of members every day and just check in on them and see how they are. Now, imagine if you got an exec at a local tennis club or netball club, they're not trying to save the world or solve the world's problems, but just check in. If you just make a few phone calls each day and check in on your members, imagine how you feel as a member that, you're a person, you're not just a membership payment. So it doesn't even have to be virtual online. It can just be as simple as a phone call.
And the next step is something else that I've also put in is a gratitude wall. I don't know whether you've heard of that before.
Yep.
But again, so once you've made that phone call, 5 or 10 of your clubs or your CWAs are going to come back and say, hey, thanks for reaching out. I really appreciated it. I needed to pick up. Well, blow it up into font of 56, put some highlighter across it and put it up on your wall, because it'll help you because everyone's going to have those days where we're going to be like that through COVID. We're going to be up or down. We're going to need little messages like that to help us keep going. So, and it may, if a footy club usually does training on a Thursday night, why not get your members to share videos of them training in their backyard, whether it's handballing or kicking against a fence. Share the video if you've got an Instagram account, tag the club or send it on. How fantastic to see what each person's doing, and you get to stay connected and they get to feel like they're in the spotlight a bit. So it's not just clubs talking at them, but really engaging. It's going to be interesting to see how we're going to be using social media in 2 months' time, whether that's in business, communities, volunteer sector, marketing, promotions.
Yeah, and I think, and it's probably not the right word, but I do feel we're in the kind of, shock/novelty phase. you know, it's a novelty that we're now all working from home. It's not a good novelty, but we haven't sort of even hit the I guess not the depths, but that sort of period where you know, we're going to have to sustain this behaviour for quite some time, where it's quite new to us. So everyone's feeling their way, and there's lots of new things popping up. So you're right. This is one phase, but in 2 months' time, 1 month's time, gosh, it moves so fast, a week's time, but 1 month's time, 2 months' time, when people have potentially been home for 3 months. So it was all fun and games at the start, you know, when we were logging on and doing fun Zoom things, but what will they need then that you could offer as a club to keep them engaged?
Oh, and can you just imagine, like, well, we're not ready to have that conversation yet, but if you've got that bottle of champagne and you're going to pop, so once COVID and we're ready to actually pop, the community is going to have some strategies to be able to deal with that, because, you know, what are you going to want to do, Georgie? Like, you know, what will you do if you've got the, you know,
and
do you go to a pub, do you go to a club, do you go and volunteer, market, whatever?
Exactly. And we've actually been talking about that from an event side, and we don't know how we'll be brought out of this, whether it will be sort of the gradual way we were brought into it, whether the restrictions will be released gradually. But if you've been in your house for 3 months, and then you go to your first event and it's noisy and it's crowded, and you've been used to being in this cocoon, how are you going to cope with that? And I sort of think back to, you know, the Big Brother house. I used to always say when they came out of it was a bit of an assault on their senses because they weren't used to that. So what's it going to be like to go to your first football match, or, you know, netball match, or whatever, or a loud nightclub or pub, when you haven't been exposed to that for potentially 3 months? So, you know, we've got to sort of start to think how we'll manage that as well.
Yeah, as I said, and all those challenges, they do change. We go through that, the tuning in, and then the storming and the forming through that change cycle. And then when we're coming out the other side is the ideas, and once we've learned to cope. So, yeah, we're not there yet. We're only really, what are we, 2 or 3 weeks into this thing?
Exactly. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been really great to chat and hear some of the stuff that's happening in the club world in Tasmania. And there's so many tips there that I know our viewers will take away. So thank you. I will wrap this up and let people know that we'll be releasing these every couple of weeks. So stay tuned to our YouTube channel, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
All right, and I said I'll make good on that promise when I said before we've got to have the follow-up. So I'll make sure I've emailed to you that little toolkit of ideas by Friday, and then you can share that across your networks.
Fantastic. Sounds good.
All right, always good to see you, George. Thanks for your time.
Bye.